Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, May 13th, 2020, and the New York Times has officially called the California 25th Congressional District special election results in favor of the Republican Mike Garcia. This is one of the first GOP pickups. Possibly we could see more up in November, but as of right now, Mike Garcia looks like he's on the pathway to be sworn in and serve up until November, until the voters again decide who they want to send to Congress. Right now, Mike Garcia has a very astonishing lead over Christy Smith. This election was supposed to be insanely close. The margin has not really narrowed as they started to count in mail-in votes. So realistically, it doesn't look like this margin is going to change too much. At the end of the day, both of these candidates will be appearing on the ballot up in November. So we should see a potential face-off again. If you remember, this is similar. If the Democrats do carry this seat, it'll be practically identical to the 2017 Georgia 6th Congressional District election, in which it was a district that either narrowly went to Trump or Hillary Clinton carried in 2016, despite being a solid Republican district for, decades prior. And Katie Hill won this seat back in 2018, and it was not super big of a deal, but it was the fact that Katie Hill was in comparison to Christy Smith, a much more inspirational and likable candidate in terms of the race itself. As we all know, Katie Hill did have to resign a long time ago. Actually probably feels like a long time ago. In reality, it actually wasn't. But she defeated a Republican incumbent by a pretty substantial margin back in 2018. It looks like there's an even larger margin in favor of Mike Garcia as it is being reported right now. I honestly do think that it will narrow up just a tad, but not enough in order for Mike Garcia to end up losing this race. We saw some things like that happening back in California back in 2018, but that was when races were within 1% to 2%. Now, this margin is astonishing for Mike Garcia. So what does this mean for Democrats as they move past this election? Well, first things first, this isn't an indication of a Democratic wave. The only Democratic pickup before the Democratic wave of 2018 was the 2018 Pennsylvania, let me think, I think it was either the 18th district. That's really weird because that would be the last district in the state, but the 18th district had a special election in which Connor Lamb won. It could have been 17th. I honestly do not remember at this point, but it was the fact that Connor Lamb ended up winning it, and it was a pickup for the Democratic Party. It was a big deal, but now this is one of the first pickups that we're seeing for the GOP. And there was also the Wisconsin 7th district. It was roughly the same margin, surprisingly, within a couple percentage points, even though the 7th district is a lot more competitive. A lot less competitive. If you see, it went for the Republicans 60.1% to 38.5%. So it did narrow up a tad bit, but the fact that it was similar to the California results that we see is just very interesting to me. The fact that Mike Garcia did very well in the Los Angeles, I believe it's just the suburban part of it, but, it's a big city and very urbanized in the sense that, it is Los Angeles and realistically should be going to the Democrats. Back in 2018, when you take a look at it, there was the primary election, but as you moved on to the general election, Katie Hill ended up winning over a number of more voters. And when you look at the jungle primary to figure out who the candidates were, Christy Smith, if given all of the votes that, if you just total up Democratic versus Republican votes, the Democrats got 51% of the vote and the Republicans got 49%. And at the end of the day, that's not what ended up being reflected here on this congressional district. Now, whether or not this is, it definitely was, the mail-in ballot issue that a number of Democratic voters did not end up voting by mail. Some of them either reserved to vote in person or just did not end up voting at all. Compared to what we saw in 2018, definitely full turnout for the Democrats in 2018, especially in California. So how is this similar to the 2018 House of Representatives race? Well, the Democrats lead by roughly the same margin they did in 2018, which is really interesting to me. In 2018, the Democrats had around an 8 to 9 point lead. I think it actually narrowed down to 7 points as we hit Election Day. And right now, the Democrats do lead by 7%, roughly 7%, a little bit under. But when you look at the numbers, they've been pretty consistent. The Democrats have always had a very consistent lead over the Republicans in terms of the generic ballot. It has expanded just a tad bit from months prior, but at the end of the day, the Democrats and Republicans have been roughly at the same standing. The Democrats have been leading, but though we are seeing similar to numbers in the nationwide level, this is not what came out in this special election. Now, I honestly don't think this is a huge deal. I do not think that there is a Republican wave coming in the House. I do think that the House is pretty much solid for the Democrats at this point. If you look at the districts that the Democrats need to win, not that many, they need to win, I think, 4 out of the numerous toss-ups there are. So realistically, the Democrats are just probably going to hold on to the House. Whether or not it secures up and narrows up in favor of the GOP is a question for the voters in November. But I do think at the end of the day, this is not a good sign for the Democratic Party. In almost every special election that we've seen prior to 2018, and even since then, whether it's the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, not so much a special election, but an election that definitely could send a message to the White House, this could have been one of them. Very well could have. It was a Democrat incumbent who resigned. It's California. It's within the reach of Los Angeles. And the only thing different is that this election was held pretty much completely virtually. There was no in-person campaign spots after the coronavirus pandemic occurred. And obviously it's still going on. And, that was probably one of the biggest things that hurt both of these candidates. They weren't able to connect with the voters. But yet, at the end of the day, Mike Garcia did something very special with this district himself. Now, whether or not he wins in a couple of months from now, doesn't matter. He won this special election. This isn't an indication of a Democratic wave yet again expecting to occur in November. Okay, Democrats were very confident about this race. I can tell you that up until the last couple of weeks, might I add, they were rolling out key top name endorsements within the final week, thinking that would, inspire people to vote on Election Day. Now, whether or not that worked in the sense that it will narrow up the race, at the end of the day, Mike Garcia won. And even if it does narrow up, even if the margin ends up being 53 to 47, it's still a victory and nothing similar to Katie Hill's victory, with 54% of the vote to 46% over a Republican incumbent. The difference is here, there is no incumbent. You're talking about a candidate who only had the president behind his back in terms of nationwide level endorsements during the primary, and Christy Smith, who was, endorsed by former President Barack Obama. When you think about that, and you think about comparing it to 2018, it should have been a lot easier for a Republican incumbent to win. Yes, it was a Democratic wave year, but this is also a special election. And Democrats have proven they will completely come out in full force in special elections, or at least almost full force. If you look at the districts that have narrowed up, Kansas is 4th. That was back in 2017. There's a number of them. Pennsylvania. If you look over at Georgia, it was just a number of special elections that did get a lot closer and did end up flipping in 2018. Whether or not they flipped in the special election, they ended up flipping later on. So I'm very, very, interested if the GOP holds on to the seat in November and, what it actually means for the Republican Party's future. The fact that they are winning back some of the districts that they carried back, they lost back in 2018, may be a warning sign for Democrats that this race may not end up being a hold in a number of seats that they think they might hold on to. These freshman congressmen from California may just be that and serve only 2-year terms and end up with the former Republican incumbent, or a new Republican in place in this election. So I think it'll be very interesting to take a look at as we move on later on. But again, it's a very similar nationwide dynamic and just landscape, and the Democrats are currently leading by the same margin they did in 2018, but it isn't really amounting to anything. If they're not winning the special election, yes, they did narrow up Wisconsin a little bit. It wasn't enough for it to be, called too close to call. In fact, this race probably shouldn't have either. As soon as those election results came out, Mike Garcia led throughout the entire night. There was no point where, it seemed like Christy Smith was capable of winning the race after the first batch of results got released. So that's not good news for the Democratic Party. I think that they should reassess and focus on what went right with Katie Hill and what went wrong with Christy Smith heading into a special election, even though there's a Democratic incumbent. Super confident, which is exactly what the Democratic Party did this time around up until the final week when they actually realized, hey, we might lose here. Same thing that the Clinton campaign did in 2016 for all those Rust Belt states. The last minute endorsements don't mean much when you've already mailed in your ballot 2 weeks ago, right? So at the end of the day, the Democrats could possibly win this back in 2020. But as of right now, I wouldn't bet too heavily on another Democratic wave in the House of Representatives. Whether or not they hold their seats, that's completely up to the DNC and what they decide to do with their money. with a DCCC, yeah, 3 C's. But it really all depends what we see in November. But again, not a good sign for Democrats as we head into November. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all tomorrow.